Hello and welcome to Fuse from PRCA, the podcast for professional marketers, communicators, and people working in public relations. Today's episode is truly fascinating, and in some ways, it's a follow-up episode with David Gallagher. I am incredibly excited about this episode. Farzana, it's lovely to be with you again on this one. David is someone who I always enjoy speaking to, but you and David have been colleagues and, connected for an incredibly long time.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm absolutely thrilled to have David. I have been inspired by David's work and just his incredible ability to convene and build relational capital with the industry. Everyone who I meet always speaks so highly of you, David. So David has obviously been at the forefront of the PR industry for decades. He is a global PR strategist and a business leader. He has a history of helping organizations and brands thrive through purpose, resilience, and impact. 25 years and more at Ketchum, Omnicom, and the head of British and global trade groups, author, speaker, and dual US-UK national. He's now the managing partner of the Next Practices Group, a new and rapidly growing agency investment group looking to unlock what's next in marketing and communications worldwide. David, we are so thrilled to have you with us today. Welcome.
Well, I'm really happy to be here with both of you. I think I posted on social media. I was really excited to see you guys partnering on this podcast, a production that I was happy to join a few years ago with you, Dan. And I couldn't think of a way to improve it, but you did by bringing Farzana on. So it's great to be here with you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant, thank you. So David, I have read your book, which
you're in my book.
Yes, I'm in your book as well, and it was such an eye opener because actually reading about the book about placing purpose at the heart of communications, and it was just I think one of the best books I've read in PR. And I've also been really fortunate to work alongside you. You've been incredible, just your strategic thinking, your experience, your kindness. So I feel very, very privileged. And what I'd love to do is to just share your journey and your insights with our listeners. So your journey started off with journalism in the 1990s. And I'd love to, for you to just share the different phases of your career so that, everyone can contextualize the conversation that we're going to have with you today.
I had a little bit of a dress rehearsal for this. I spoke to a university course in Germany, a mix of British, American, German, I guess other students from Europe. And they kind of asked me the same question. So I kind of know where they were paying attention and maybe where they checked out. But you're right. I started I thought I was going to be a journalist. I studied journalism at the University of Texas in Austin, where I grew up, near where I grew up, and that's kind of the journey that I thought I was going to begin. And there wasn't really a road to Damascus conversion. I started off as a science and policy writer, but I gradually started taking on other responsibilities. I'll get to that in a moment. That brought me closer into what we would all consider to be classic PR. And then at some point I realized I was a PR person and not a journalist. But it's tempting when you try to summarize your career, especially when you've just been you're as old as I am, as many years behind it as I do. It's kind of tempting to look back and then structure a narrative, some sort of journey that makes some sense. And I think that's kind of what I did when I spoke to university class. But when I saw heard the recording, I realized that was a little bit misleading in a way. You tend to kind of cast yourself as a hero in some sort of Luke Skywalker type journey of redemption, and that's just not how my career at least has played out at all. If anything, I think my career has been more like a Forrest Gump story of being at the right place at the right time, and maybe making myself available to opportunities as they presented themselves. So just in kind of short form, chapter one for me was set in Texas. I grew up there, went to university there. That definitely was the source of my values, such as they are, probably my biases, prejudices, and my outlook at the world was definitely formed in a small town in Texas. Chapter two for me after university was in in Washington, D.C. Texas was in a pretty significant recession when I left university. It's hard to imagine that now as hot as the economy is there. But I got on my first airplane ever. I'd never been on an airplane until I moved to Washington, D.C. with a one-way ticket, no job, and just thought I'd see what happened next. And as it happens, I did find work with a small nonprofit that converted into work with a bigger nonprofit. But again, I was a science and policy writer. And it wasn't until I came in contact with an agency called Hill and Knowlton that I saw what PR was like. I thought I kind of wanted to do something like that. But um, uh, from the American Diabetes Association, this larger not-for-profit, I found my way into Ketchum. At that time, a medium-sized PR company. It subsequently grew into kind of one of the biggest PR companies in the world. And I was doing just kind of classic healthcare related PR. Chapter 3 for me was in London. My CEO at the time said, "Hey, I don't know what's next for you, but would you consider doing a stint in London?" So again, I got on an airplane. I had been on plenty of airplanes by that point, but I didn't have a passport. I had to get a passport. It was really arrogant of me to think that I could just drop into a foreign country and help run an agency or build a practice. And it was pretty humbling. And then it was very humbling, but that worked its way out. And then the last chapter, the one I'm in now, still set in London, but outside of Ketchum, outside of the holding company that Omnicom that Ketchum owns, and on to something that I think's hopefully going to be just as exciting as the first 3 chapters. And I just take you through that to say that you don't know what's going to happen next. I never knew what was going to happen next. And for anybody who's sitting there wondering, can they do something different? Can they climb out of whatever thing they're in now and find something new and interesting? Do they have the skills for that? You definitely do. You just have to kind of make yourself available to those opportunities. And that was my main message for the students, that you don't know what's next, but if you have a good attitude and an open mind, opportunity will generally find you. I just encourage them to get out and see what they could do.
I mean, you spent 26 years at Omnicom.
Who's counting? But yeah.
And and obviously you made the decision to leave and and have a look over the other side of the wall, because obviously you were very much sort of involved in sort of big agency land, and did you find it quite sort of quite scary, the prospect of leaving, almost institutionalized? 26 years is a very, very long time. And I'm sure some of our listeners are sort of thinking, what, I'm in an organization or a job, I've been there for a certain amount of time. I'd quite like to see, and explore other pastures. But, people tend to be quite sort of nervous about change, especially sort of as we sort of grow into our careers. So just wanted to know just a little bit more about your sort of decision-making process and, and how that journey's been for you, that sort of pivot that you've done.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, actually I was terrified, to be honest. And that terror probably delayed a decision by at least a year, maybe 2 years. Like a lot of people, the pandemic kind of accelerated some thought processes I was having. I knew that I didn't want to get to a point where I was burned out or angry or disliking my job. I think sometimes people do that. So I didn't want to be in a place where I was running from something. I definitely wanted to be headed toward something. I wasn't entirely sure what that was. I was nervous that my skills wouldn't translate in the outside world. A place like Ketchum, and then when I went to the holding company, it's a self-contained universe, and you start to believe that your value is really navigating that little self-contained universe, and you kind of lose track of what's happening outside. So, yeah, it was a frightening process. I did get some encouragement along the way. After I made the decision to go, I decided where I thought I would be best placed was to help smaller agencies, medium-sized agencies, find their next expression of progress and value. You and I, we knew each other a little bit before then, but we were able to work together. And you were very supportive, a huge source of inspiration and encouragement for me. There were a few others, both in the agency world and outside the agency world, that kind of took a similar interest, and I had a great time collaborating with them. And what I came through my experience with you and others was to realize that this little aquarium I was in was actually just a little container in a much bigger sea of opportunity as it relates to communications, PR, marketing, and media. that's not to disparage where I was from. I was blinded to what was available outside of that environment. One of the agencies I was advising was in need of some structural help and looking for investment, and I brought them to a guy I had worked with, knew and respected for a long time, Bob Pearson, who started the Next Practices Group, which you referenced earlier. That transaction didn't work out in the end, but he was so gracious and generous in the way he managed that process. I thought he might be disappointed in the outcome, maybe disappointed in me for not being able to steer it to conclusion. But instead, he said, "No, let's work together. We need more of those opportunities, and that they don't always come home. They don't always come home on the first try. But let's work together." And I saw that we did have kind of a nice complementary approach to business and a shared view of what's next. So earlier this year, I joined the Next Practices Group. But had I known, well, I did know that was going to be the outcome when I left Omnicom. I was quite nervous about that. So if you are nervous about it, I guess I just say gather some support, talk to people you trust and respect, and take a leap of faith.
I'd like to get on, if I may, to the book and revisiting that shortly, but you know the way that my brain works and we tend to just go wherever the flow of the conversation is. Something that intrigues me, and I'm actually going to almost treat this as an open question to you both, because I'm intrigued, is that moment, going back into your history, the lessons you learned about going to another territory and working within that territory. My experience is something I'd like to share, which is having worked for an agency in London, the goal was always to go international, and international was always defined as opening a unit in New York. It's the default. You're in London, you open in New York. You're in New York, you open in London, or somewhere else in North America. So my question to you is, did you face that classic moment where you go, I know I'm good at what I do, but there are brilliant people here and I'm not bringing the font of everything. I have to actually think differently because I'm playing in their yard now.
That's for me. I mean, no one does this better than Farzana. I mean, in terms of recognizing where she needs to help people feel comfortable with how things are done in this part of the world, or making how things are done in this part of the world understandable to other people in other parts of the world. No one's better than Farzana. And I say that with firsthand knowledge, having sat through a number of client conversations with her. So she might be better suited, but since I'm talking now, I guess I'll continue to answer. My first 2 years at least were extremely humbling on just about every level. What I thought I knew professionally, and I'd like to think was valid, but it was a lot less meaningful in a place where the media works differently, where government organizations function differently, where stakeholder relations are defined differently. All that was a huge wake up for me. And as I said, I came in a little bit arrogantly, thinking that I had I had the knowledge that would make me successful. But it was also humbling personally as well. My interpersonal skills, which I had kind of honed against an American backdrop, didn't always register with people here. It took me a long time to understand just basic exchanges and how progress is actually made in relationships and in conversations. So I would say, yeah, it was at least 2 years of not quite utter humiliation, but it was a humbling experience, and it took me a while to kind of regain my confidence and realize that I still had something to offer, but it was just going to be on other people's terms, not necessarily how I thought I was going to succeed.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I switched from accounting to politics to PR, and I've always been interested in the other. I've always been, very sort of curious and happy to sort of do learning curves in different sectors, and I find it sort of, curiosity is really key. So when you go into a new environment or a new culture, to just be curious, to learn, having that humility as well, because you have to sort of, in a way, put down your sack of tools and expertise that worked in a previous culture or, a previous sector. You just have to be humble. And I think the third piece is listen. So really actively listening, because, when you're in an environment where you've been doing really well, you can sometimes start treading water and actually stop listening. And I think when you put yourself out of that comfort zone into a new arena, then I think this sort of active listening skill set really helps. But yeah, really interesting, and really inspiring, David, how you have pivoted from different parts of the industry.
I really appreciate hearing that from both of you, because my experience was your accent can only get you so far for so long. You're the one that's interesting because you're the person who's different in the room, and people will for a while ask you, well, what's it like back home? How is the industry from your experience? And, there might be brands that work in one territory and another, but the relationship dynamics can be incredibly different. And Farzana, particularly, when I see you working across the globe and touching many organizations and representing many and giving them a voice or helping provide them with a voice, I certainly see that that sense of localization for different corporations is incredibly important and powerful, because the voice that organization X needs in North America is one thing, but the voice they need in the United Kingdom or even in different parts of Europe is something then that is different. Now, David, if we could go back a few years now, because we kind of started this journey in 2020. Pandemic was really on top of us. It was a desperately strange and sad situation, and the world was a different place. We've come out to a world which has evolved, and we have different ways of communicating. We have different ways that people engage with each other in meaningful ways. And throughout all this period of time, obviously the book, the reason why we connected in the first place, I'd like to just revisit for people who haven't really touched upon it. Could you just give us the high level reason behind it and your collaboration, and then the lessons you've learned since? And is there anything that you would do differently?
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely things I would do differently. And I have thought about this recently, and not just in anticipation of this conversation, but partly. So the book came out 2 years ago, and it probably took me almost that entire 2 years before I wanted to actually read it again. I don't know if you've ever written something like that, but you get pretty sick of it, and the last thing you want to see is a typo or a mistake or just something you wish you'd rephrase. So it took me a while to pick it up. But just to go back, I co-wrote it with my friend and colleague, Omnicom colleague John O'Brien, who's written several books on purpose, had good relationships with publishers, and was extraordinarily generous with both his knowledge and contacts. And I don't know, in fact, I'm pretty sure I would not have not done it yet, without his help and guidance. So he was the senior writer on the book. We approached a publisher here in London in a meeting without a proposal and walked out with the contract. So this is how clear he was in his vision and the types of relationships he had. And I always remember that was in January of 2020. So he went back to Shropshire where he lives. The meeting was in London. I just got on the tube and went home. And I never saw him again until after the book was published, because everything got locked down. So we wrote the entire book like this, virtually, which was not ideal. And there was definitely moments when I didn't sleep. I was worried about making deadlines. I was worried if this even made sense. Sometimes he had to encourage me not to give up. Sometimes I had to encourage him not to give up. But we made it through. And I've reread the book, and I'm pretty happy with it still. He might be. I hope he's happy with it still. But I'm speaking for myself on it. I'll speak just a little bit about the book, and then I'll speak about books in general, and hopefully offer some encouragement to you too in particular, but to listeners. Looking back on it, what we had foreseen was a world changing quite quickly. We did manage to make some references to the pandemic, although we didn't really know what we were in when we were writing it. But what we saw, a culture, a society, an environment that we described as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we thought that was going to put business leaders and communicators in a particularly challenging position, and that they were going to have to make sense of what people expected of them, what their stakeholders, customers, consumers, investors, what was expected of them, but in an environment that was changing quite quickly. And we tried to kind of map out what had happened in the past 200 years of business and where we thought things might go. And I'm happy to say I think we got most of it right. I think that things have gotten more VUCA than less. I don't think that's changing. And I think if we didn't say how to deal with it, we at least gave people ample warning that as a brand, as a company, as a leader, as an institution, expectations will shift, but they'll never avert themselves. They'll never go away. You're always going to be asked to have a point of view on matters. So I think we got that right. Just where I think we got it wrong. I wish we'd spent more time on ESG. I did look. I think there's only like 2 pages on ESG. And in our defense, we both looked at it as kind of an acronym that makes sense for investment analyst. And that's how we looked at it. We didn't really look at it as a political football. We didn't look at it as any sort of social commentary. It's more just a benchmark to see if companies were well managed. I wish we'd spent a little bit more time on that. I also think we combined the idea of brand purpose and organizational purpose, and should have either spent more time delineating. They are very similar, but they're quite different too. Delineating the differences, or maybe even it should have been 2 different books, because they are quite different concepts. And I've had to, in different conversations, kind of explain what we meant or why we thought the concepts applied. But that's just my experience, and I got a lot out of the process. I try to write. One thing I've tried to maintain is a habit of writing something every day. I don't always put that out I don't always post it, although that was helpful too. The feedback and the reactions you get really helps your writing. But the main thing, and I say this really to you both, because Dan, you've spoken to hundreds of leaders in comms and PR. I know you've got some great stories and anecdotes to share. I know definitely, Farzana, you've got at least 3 books in you. And I would just say, I would really encourage you. I want to hear them. I think other people do. But you personally will benefit from the process of writing down your thoughts, forcing yourself to put them into some sort of table of contents, and then working through some copy. Whether you ever decide to get it published or not, you'll benefit from it. It will consolidate your thinking, and I bet when you get some feedback, you realize that you do have something publishable. And I think that's true with most people. At least a lot of your listeners have things worth saying, and there's will be no harm in actually starting the process. So bring us all the way back to John O'Brien. I'm very grateful for him asking me to do this with him, because I don't know if he hadn't said words similar to me. I don't know that I would have done it on my own. So get out there and write your books.
Farzana, what's your thoughts on that?
We've talked about this, Farzana.
Yeah, I've been wanting to write a book for literally 10 years. And I just lack the discipline. And I've got this mind block. And in my mind, I sort of think, I've got this romantic notion of writing a book that I should hire out a little cottage on a lake somewhere and no internet and just sit there with my dog and this great inspiration will strike me and it will just flow. And I just, and what I need to really do is have the discipline, like you, David, just every day, get into the habit of writing, finding a pocket in your sort of calendar. I say to myself, I don't have the time, but the reality is if I've got the time to binge watch Netflix for like 2 hours, or whatever, or 3 hours, then I've got the time to write. So it's really about being self-disciplined, prioritizing, and just, and I think there's also a sense of fear, there's a fear if I write it, who the hell would want to read it? Will it do well? Would anybody buy it other than my, grandmother? So I think there's a lot of fear and procrastination. At some point I would love to do it. Let's just, see. But Dan, you've interviewed so many greats and giants of our industry like David. So I guess for you, just having that sort of condensed into, all the different voices that you've listened to over the years, I guess that's a really good way to go.
If I was ever to write a book, I think it would be called Lessons I've Learned. The purpose of every podcast and where this started and the evolution of it was to get access to people and just to ask questions, because Farzana, you mentioned it, that essence of being curious, being willing to listen. And, without this podcast, I would have probably picked up people's books, or I would, attend more events. I'm incredibly privileged in the fact that I've got a mechanic, I've got a device to enable me to just speak to people, and for that I'm very aware of and very thankful for. One of the other things I'm really thankful for as well is, well, I've got a little device here, and on this device I've got WhatsApp, and in WhatsApp I find it very handy. I can call people anywhere in the world and have chats and whatever. But David, your WhatsApp group is possibly the anchor of nearly all free thinking in marketing, communications, public relations, and then humanity. There's a big sense of humanity. I love that people throw ideas out there and go, hey, thinking of this, any thoughts, or people who put kickoff topics on there. Can we go back to the start? I'm intrigued why you would use that as a platform. What inspired it, and has it become what you imagined it to become?
Well, that's a funny story, and it kind of goes back to my bumbling Forrest Gump approach to life. I did not design that with any purpose or intent. It was more just an experiment. Before I go into that, I just want to say you do make a really good point. You're writing and creating every single day by virtue of what you do, and I really wouldn't want to diminish this podcast or your other projects. But I still would say you've got some wisdom you can condense, and going through the process of writing it down would be helpful.
Are you really trying to make me blush? Because it's working. Anyone who's not watching this will see this bright red glow. David, you're being too kind. Now stop it.
I just want to say that you should write down. My chairman, Bob Pierce, I mentioned, he just took a similar approach to what you did. He realized that over the years, he's talked to hundreds of leaders. So he's written a book called Firm Beliefs. It just takes down lessons that he's learned from other people. Again, very generous with what other people have taught him. And it's also a much easier way to write a book. No, not to disparage Bob's efforts, but when you're writing down in kind of anecdote form, it's an easy way to get a lot of wisdom out there. But back to the WhatsApp group. So I knew that I did not have the discipline. This is when I was running my own advisory business. I didn't have the discipline to write a blog. And I also felt other people's blogs were really interesting. I couldn't imagine that mine would be interesting at all. But I thought I probably have one thing I could discover a day that would be worth sharing. So that's literally what I did. I invited 10 or 15, Farzana, you were definitely in the original set, people that I thought if I didn't have something interesting on a day, they certainly would. And I started posting a link or something that I thought was interesting. Usually related to PR or marketing or media, occasionally dipping into politics, and then often dipping into science or culture. But usually how these things were communicated, how they were treated by journalists or businesses or brands. And that group's got about a little over 400 members right now. And they're from all over the world, all different levels. About half I don't actually know. They just identify as a phone number because they kind of found their own way in. So I don't always know who they are. It's required almost no policing, though. I mean, it's a very self-regulated group. And what I think it speaks to your kind of setup for this, Dan, is the power of community. And without trying to get too profound about it, what I've realized is that it's so easy now to create and participate in communities of all kinds that don't take a lot of work. And in fact, you don't have to be the star of them at all, but you'll find daily sources of inspiration, perspectives, Q&A. What I love about this group is people will just, without hesitation, say, does anybody know how to blank? And they'll usually get 4 or 5 really good answers about that, or how you need to worry about doing it differently in India than you might in South Africa. So it's a very powerful way of creating, I think, a responsive, encouraging community. I've done the same thing for my university alumni group, different set of interests. I'm in a group that I didn't organize, but I tried to be active in for businesses interested in encouraging other businesses to get out of Russia related to supporting the people of Ukraine. Um, Actually, an initiative that Farzana brought me into very early in the war with some of her contacts. So there are some kind of concentric overlapping circles in some of the things. But main point here is that if you can't find a community that works for you, then you can create one quite easily. But I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to find one pretty quickly. And then I would just say dive in.
Can I just say, I love your WhatsApp group. It's the only WhatsApp group that I am a willing participant of. All of the other WhatsApp groups is because I'm forced to be in there. But I love it because I love reading the news, and then I go on the WhatsApp group because whatever news is sort of trending, someone's found an interesting story, and then you have these incredibly smart PRs that are giving their different perspectives. So it's so fascinating, and it's part of my daily routine, and it's added so much value. And I just think it's incredible that we have these tools today like WhatsApp. And David, you just decided to create a WhatsApp group that adds so much value to so many of us. And I think it's just having that sense of community, because you have certain voices in the group that comment quite often, and they're always incredibly insightful, and really take sort of care not to sort of just do a knee-jerk reaction comment, but really well thought out. Because of course, who wants to sort of say the wrong thing in front of hundreds of PR people, who are going to sort of with a critical gaze, sort of dissect everything. So it's actually it's such a brilliant platform, and huge gratitude to you, David. If somebody's listening and they want to be part of this WhatsApp group, what would you advise them to do?
Well, I usually don't publish the link openly, just because we'll get inundated with crypto bots and porn bots and all sorts of unsolicited input. It probably just to DM me, and I can share a link, and I will occasionally post it like on my LinkedIn profile. So that might be the easiest way. People find me on LinkedIn, and then I can deliver it that way. Yeah, but you're right. There is kind of a general, like a sociologically consistent 80-20 rule. And I think 20% of the participants post about 80% of the content. And I bet that's true in just about any other environment when you get people together. I think sometimes that can be intimidating for others who are kind of afraid about making their debut post. So if you are in that group, that 80%, and you're worried, is now my moment to post, it definitely is. And I would just encourage people to go ahead and say what they want to say. It's not all PR people. I would say that too. I'd say it's about half PR people, half people just in other, usually Marcoms related disciplines. There are probably a dozen journalists, and I have asked the journalists privately to treat the content carefully. I didn't want this to be a source of big scoops and to go back to people, and that people were expressing themselves pretty freely, and I didn't want anybody to worry about that. And there are probably about 25, I would say, to 40 pretty senior clients, and it's just interesting to see. I can see kind of who's interested in what kinds of content, and they're very interested in certain types of content. They're reluctant sometimes to identify themselves, so for understandable reasons, they don't want to get swarmed by agency people. But it's a good, healthy mix. So I hope as it grows, we'll kind of keep the same proportions.
I think it's great. And what's incredible is that you do so much. You create these communities in WhatsApp. It's the first I've heard that you have more than one. You have one for your alumni, as well as for business owners. You also obviously have created and published this incredible book on purpose, which so many of us have read, and it's really shifted our thinking in terms of how we work. You've also created, so was it the Ukraine Communications Network as well?
Yeah. At the beginning of the war, that was a PRCA initiative, and full credit to PRCA and to ICCO for trying to create a platform for agencies and consultants who were eager to do something for the people of Ukraine, and needed a platform for doing that. So I co-chaired that, with Natalia Popovich, very respected business leader from Ukraine. And I don't want to say it's run its course, because the war hasn't run its course, but we did find over time it was hard to maintain that kind of same level of intense commitment from agency people. So she is active in this organization called, became active in another organization called Business for Ukraine. And that's a coalition of different civil society organizations, some businesses, and some government organizations, some universities, to encourage Western businesses to exit the Russian and Belarusian markets, just because that their tax revenue ends up fueling the war effort. And I've joined as a volunteer advisor for that. So that's where most of my time goes as it relates to Ukraine. But I will, and I have to thank you, Farzana, because when the war first broke out, you were very well connected with the Ukrainian diaspora, and you introduced me to a number of people that I'm still in contact with, and made that issue a personal one for me. And I think I would have, like a lot of people, been appalled by what I was seeing, but not sure how or where or whether to get involved. And really, you helped open the doors for that. So you know how to do this too.
But you really walk the talk. I mean, all of your ideas and values in your book on purpose, you really have taken that and launched so many initiatives, be it creating a community for PRs, to supporting businesses who want to support Ukraine, as well as so many others. What I was intrigued as an agency co-founder, often we set up agencies and we just work, sort of hamster on a hamster wheel, constantly running, just focusing on keeping the client sweet and the colleague sweet, and it's just that dynamic. And eventually, after a while, we're like, what do we do now? Do we want to continue running the business? Is it sellable? What do we need to do now in order for it to be sellable? You sometimes see these sort of big acquisitions on PR week, and so-and-so has been bought by X million, and so-and-so has been bought. And then there's so many other agencies that you never hear about anything. And do they wind down? And you've got the management buyout option, which, I think Lanson's recently went down that route. So I just wanted to know, for agency sort of co-founders who are either immediately thinking of selling or thinking in the next 10 years, what advice would you give them? Because, we often think, well, it's a people's business, it's so relationship orientated. How could you sell that? So just wanted to hear in terms of, with your new role, what do you look for? What do you advise? What are the timelines? I think that would be incredibly useful.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And thank you for asking. So I've been in this new role since February, I guess, and I bet I've spoken to 60, maybe 70 founders. Not all in PR businesses. We're trying to build a group that has solid future looking businesses across different disciplines, and PR is just one of them. But just because my own background experience, I've been talking mostly to PR people. And their concerns or excuses for not thinking about this are exactly as you just outlined it. I got too busy. I got clients who need me right now. I've got people who are counting on me. I don't even know if I have something sellable. So those are exactly the barriers. And I guess what I'd say is I understand that completely. But if you do want some value in the business you're building now, you have to start thinking about this now. An exit probably won't just fall in your lap. So I guess that's the bad news. If you consider that bad news, you're going to have to be proactive with this. The good news is that right now the market here in the UK, where you and I are sitting, but I think it's probably true, Dan, in Canada, in the US, a lot of international or Western European markets, the market's pretty good for what we're doing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Partly going back to the way we started off this conversation about just how chaotic the world is now and how organizations need help, and they need help from quality businesses and consultancies that know how to help them navigate that. So there's a lot of reasons why what we do is valuable right now. So that's good news. The second piece of good news is that there are a lot of different roads you can take. If you want to get out quick and make your money, there are buyers for that. That's going to require certain organization and structure for your business, and you probably need to test the market quickly to see if you've got something that will help you that way. If you're looking further along for a business that you think can grow, that's where we fit in. We help with the different kind of investment, different type of structures to help you grow a business that will be worth hopefully more later than it would have been by itself. So we build that together. There are ways to make it valuable for your employees through a management buyout, as you talked about. There's no shortage of ways forward. I guess what I'd say is if you're thinking about it, then start a conversation, realizing there are multiple ways of doing this, and then just keep at it. But it won't happen. It won't happen by itself. You're going to have to be proactive. Not you personally, but agency.
If someone is interested, or be it immediate or sort of 10 years, are you open for them to reach out to you to have a conversation?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
About next practices, and how does next practice work? So, for instance, do you just acquire an agency outright? Is it over time? Is there an earn-out period? What's sort of unique about the positioning of your organization amongst the whole landscape of M&A specialists and so forth out there, so people kind of understand?
Yeah, well, we try to be, but I'll be honest, everybody's going to say this, but we try to be founder friendly. And just like this conversation we've just been having, I think we have a pretty good idea what founders are thinking about and the concerns they will have, not just for the deal itself, but for the people that they've hired, the clients that they've worked to cultivate. So we do work hard to create something that creates value over time. We don't do earnouts. So for people who want a quick, lucrative exit, there are other options for them. And I was at Omnicom for a number of years and worked through a bunch of those, and hopefully some of them were successful. So I don't want to disparage those. But if you are looking over a 5 to 10 year horizon and you see opportunities that would that you could realize with a little bit of help, and that could be financial, that could be strategic, that could be networking, maybe some combination of the three, I think we're a good fit for those. So usually the conversations divide pretty quickly, and people say, I just want to make as much money as I can right now for what I built. Fair enough. And like I say, there are great options for you to do that. If you say, actually, I'm on a longer horizon, can we talk about what the future might look like? That's more our approach.
There's a question to this structure, and just listening to you both speaking about this, there are people who come into the industry who are practitioners, and they will forever be practitioners and don't really want to own or run a business, and that's not on their trajectory. There are others that come into this industry, they either work for someone else or they start at that embryonic stage of solo or partnership, etc. And there's a goal to grow a great business. But is there something about the structure of this business, this trade that we're in, that really does seem to encourage this, I wouldn't like to call it a selling mentality to cash out, but I look at a lot of different sectors and I don't necessarily see it with all of them, that there is this desire to become taken over by a holding group. But with our sector, there is. Do you think there's some reason behind that, or some motivation, or it's just the natural way that many organizations have gone?
Well, I would actually be curious to see how Farzana answers this. But you left the accounting world. I don't know if that followed the same sort of trajectory. I know that sometimes small accountancies sell themselves to bigger accountancies, but so maybe there's a parallel industry. But you also saw something in comms and PR that was attractive to you. So I'd be more interested in your perspective than mine. Although I'm not trying to dodge your questions, I will come back to.
I think it's really interesting because obviously I've worked in accounting and also in PR, and they are both professions. They're service businesses, and I do a lot of work with law firms. So I've got quite a lot of insight working with law firms, and I always find it fascinating how and also sort of management consultants. So how do we sort of organize our sort of knowledge, and how do we sell our knowledge, and how do we sort of embed it into a brand that is sellable beyond the founders? And often I sort of find, obviously with lawyers, you have the partnership model. You've seen some PR agencies sort of flirt with a partnership model, and more on sort of the corporate comm side. You've got some agencies that really build brand. So when you think about McKinsey, you don't really think about the sort of senior leadership as such. The brand is done so well in terms of that people buy McKinsey like they buy sort of IBM. So I think when I look at sort of PR agencies, I sort of I've got friends in advertising agencies who just always seem a little bit more bolder in the way they approach their business. And I think it's because advertising agencies in the past had access to data that made them sort of, less apprehensive about selling their wares. And I think with PRs, if we look at our history, a lot of the work that we were doing, or when I first started out, was media relations, where we didn't have much control over the output. So we were selling services always slightly on a back foot because we couldn't 100% quantify and qualify the work that we were doing. And I think that gave us some inherent instability, inherent sort of insecurity, which other professional service firms don't. I mean, we're always sort of like, oh, sorry, the media coverage didn't go your way. It must be our fault. We'll work for free for another month. I just won't eat for another, 2 weeks. Whereas, you're not going to get law firms saying, well, sorry, you lost the case, honey. Let me just give you a refund on the legal fees. So, there's something about the psyche of the PR. Innately, we are people pleasers, some of us. And I think, there's a mixture of our, our background as being feeling inferior to our sort of marketing brothers and sisters and ad agencies, and that sort of sense of people pleasing and not having confidence in ourselves. And I think as we move from tactical to strategic work, and I think the more bold we are, the more confident we are, then we can actually really kind of sort of demarcate our lanes. Because at the moment, everyone's swimming in each other's lanes. We've got law firms coming into public affairs. We've got, accountancy firms, working on sort of reputation. And management consultants, are there to take our strategic work unless we really start building confidence in an industry. I mean, we're still thinking, how do we, what is PR? And where does it start and where does it end? So we're having all that sort of existential angst that we need to overcome. But I'm really gung-ho about the PR industry. I think we are at the right place at the right time. We've got now this data, and we've got the ability to communicate not just with the gatekeepers of journalists, but we can communicate directly. And that comes great power, but also great sense of responsibility. And that's where I think, David, your book is so important, because purpose wasn't that needed in the PR industry back in the day when the journalists were the gatekeepers, because they were the ethical lens. We would just pitch and we would just say, well, it's not our responsibility because the journalist makes the ultimate decision. But we are now creating content that goes straight into the heart of the public. And that's why purpose is critical in PR. And that's why I think, we are at the forefront of this sort of, new era of public relations, which I think is really exciting. But I hope we can have the confidence to stand up, on our own 2 feet and not be as humble as we are, perhaps.
I knew you'd have a good answer, a better answer than mine. So I'm glad you went with that. So so thanks for that. Did I get what you wanted to get to as well, Dan?
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting space where we haven't necessarily seen the value in ourselves, and we've heard how green the grass is over here or over at the other side, and that sense of self-belief. I've got someone who comes into my office every day and gives this affirmation of, you've got this. And do you know how many times I now say, I know. Do you know what? I'm not being arrogant. I know what to do. It's just the getting there sometimes is the challenge. But just hearing it makes such a difference. And for some people, it's looking at the wall and seeing the certificate from the university. And for other people, it's the book or books. And for me, Bella coming into my office and saying, you got this, it makes such a difference. David, just moving on if we can, as we're getting towards the end of our time together. That next generation that does come into public relations in this crazy Marcom's world, the years that you had at Omnicom, the experience you've got now, the experience in your early part of your career, would you say that the advice that Farzana, yourself, and me that I could give to people is relevant to someone who is 18 years old? Or are we more to get to that stage of nurturing? Because the world has changed. The principles of communication and relationship building has not changed. But should we dare to still speak to the youth and the future of tomorrow?
Well, I Yes, I think we should, and that's I spend some available time. I try at least once a week to do something where I'm either talking to a class or a student or writing something that I think would entice smart people into our business. But this theme that Farzana was talking about in terms of our confidence, where we fit in the world, what our real value is, it's ongoing. And I've been in this business for a really long time now, and we keep having the same conversations, which leads me to believe that there might not ever be a resolution to it. It's just a condition that we exist in. I think you could do a whole spin-off series of podcasts on giving people weekly positive affirmations of value within the PR community. But I'll let you decide your.
Hold on, wait. I'll see if Bella will come in. No, okay.
But yeah, I do think that like all businesses, trades, professions, whatever we call ourselves, we're in a battle for the best and brightest of the next generation. So I think if we believe in what we're doing, we think it has a future, then we have to stay committed to encouraging people, bright people, to come into this business, and keeping bright people from exiting, from seeing some other reason to leave, and that can be a full-time job by itself. Does our advice have any value? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't always get an opportunity to go back and ask people what they've done. But I've seen a few people that I met earlier in their careers who've gone on to succeed, not because of me. I hasten to say, but it gives me some encouragement. I won't name them because I don't have permission to. But I met with at the time a young student from Poland, studying here in London, and he asked to interview me for a series of interviews he was posting on LinkedIn, which, by the way, was a brilliant idea on his part. So he emails me or texts me on LinkedIn and said, by the way, so and so, an agency, your counterpart competitor at another agency, he answered my 5 questions about what it takes to get ahead in PR. Would you do the same thing? And of course, yeah, of course I'll do that. I'm as important as that guy. So then I answered my 5 questions, and he said, "But can you recommend somebody else that would do this?" I probably even asked him to go talk to you, Farzana. So anyway, he ends up publishing 200 of these little micro interviews with very bright, well, not always, but mostly bright people in the business, senior people. Pretty sure he got 1 or 2 job offers out of it, and that in itself embodies what I try to tell students or young people to do. So go out and make connections. Ask people questions that you think their answers will be useful, and then be generous with what they've told you. So rather than use this advice and try to hoard it for your own professional development, go out and share it. Create a community around that. Share that with your fellow students and eventually your colleagues. And for me, it's kind of just a little microcosm of community, of content, of humility, but also generosity. And I use that example a lot. But if that's too complex or too abstract, I've started quoting Barack Obama on this when students ask him for advice. And he says, just be the person who knows how to get shit done. And if you are the person who can get shit done, it doesn't matter what level you are, what field you're in, what you're doing, you will be the person that becomes most valuable to your team. And I firmly believe that. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can do them both, but that's kind of the advice I try to give.
So I guess my last question is, to thrive in PR, there's constantly new platforms and channels, and and the world is constantly moving, and we've got new AI-driven tools. So let's just park all of that there in terms of all the stuff that we need to continuously learn and unlearn and learn, and that's a given. That change will be a constant in terms of the tools that we get to play with. But in terms of attitude, what type of attitude or approach to life should a PR have? I mean, you mentioned, for instance, creating content and community, and when I look at your career and I look at how you've succeeded, a lot of what you do is you've got a very generous heart. It's all about giving. It's like what value can I bring to people without any sort of expectation of anything in return? And that builds a lot of, I think, goodwill in the industry, which is why everyone always champions you and always is very positive whenever your name is mentioned. And so I'd say one area that, just observing you over the years, is that sort of generosity of spirit. What else do you think that a PR should really sort of possess and hone, and ignore the technical side of PR? Obviously, it's just more character.
Well, first, that's very kind of you, so thank you. Everything you said is touching, so thank you for that. I'm not a fan of generosity just because I'm a nice guy. I actually pragmatically think it works well in the long run, and that whatever you give, you get back 3 or 4 or 5 fold. So in some ways, it's almost a selfish act, but I just think things work better when you behave in that way. I guess I would kind of come back to things that I've learned from you in particular, Farzana, just because I've seen you in settings that I haven't always seen Dan in. But you are extraordinarily good listener, and I've been in situations where I wasn't sure where the conversation was going to go, or if between the two of us we had anything of value to offer. Maybe selling you short, and maybe admitting my own insecurities, but in your listening and ability to kind of keep people talking, you were able to uncover what the real concern was or opportunity was. And that is an art that a lot of people don't have naturally. I do think it's learnable. I think I don't know if you have always been a good listener. Maybe somebody taught you how to do this, but you are. And I think that's kind of the second thing I look for when I'm talking to potential colleagues or investments or people to hire. First, I do want to sense their generosity, but right up there, I want to know, are they a good listener? Almost more importantly to me than are they a good speaker or writer or anything else? Because if you're not a good listener, I don't think you're going to be a good speaker or writer or even a thinker. And I guess and maybe this is a restatement of one or both of them, but the third thing I look for is a sense of kindness. In different stages of my career, I realized I've been in environments that were not really concerned with kindness, and maybe that's too soft. Weren't too concerned with humanity. They were much more focused on other harder metrics, and that's fine. There's plenty of people who can thrive in that environment, but that's just not one that I found conducive for myself. So, generosity, listening, kindness / humanity. I think that's a pretty good recipe for at least the kind of PR that I want to be involved with, that I want to practice.
We've come to the end of another episode. David, I was just looking at the archive here. You're the only person to have appeared on Fuse 3 times, and I look forward to the 4th appearance very, very much so. If people wanted to find out more and get in touch, you've heard me ask this question before, how could they do that, David?
LinkedIn is easy. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's a longer story, but T-Bone Gallagher, pretty easy to find, or by email, david.gallagher@nextpracticegroup.com.
And Farzana, we obviously want people to be able to connect with you. How could they do that?
God, I'm everywhere. I love all social media platforms: Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Threads, but kind of slightly got bored of that now. But I check everything, every day. So whatever's easiest for people.
And you can find me, I'm Dan Gold Media. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fuse. If you'd like to find out more about this very production, it's incredibly simple. Go to prca.org.uk/Fuse. You'll find all of the links to all of our episodes, but I am going to ask you if you can pop onto your favorite podcast app. If it has the opportunity for you to rate this, please do give it 5 stars, or even better, if that platform can allow you to do so.